All right, what's up, everybody? My name is Dan. This is Hard Knocks Talks. In 2017, Kathy Wagner's son Tristan tragically passed due to drug poisoning. Tonight, Kathy is here with us to share her story and tell us how she is helping others find hope. Hello, Kathy.
Hi, hi, Dan. Thank you so much for connecting people and their stories.
Well, and thank you so much for being available on such short notice. That was like what, like yesterday or the day before. I'm like, Kathy, I need a guest, and you're like, I got you.
Got your
So,
back.
yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we jump in?
No, just that I really appreciate being here and all that you do to help people feel that they are not alone. I think that's one of the most important things we can
Mm,
do for each other.
awesome. All right, let's jump in.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
Okay, if you are struggling with the substance use of a loved one or have tragically lost a loved one to drug-related harms, reach out to Stronger Together Canada, peer-led support groups by Mums Stop the Harm, and or Nar-Anon groups of Saskatchewan. If you are in search of private inpatient addictions treatment, check out Prairie Sky Recovery Centre, located in Leipzig, Saskatchewan. To make contact or learn more about today's sponsors, check out our new merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are in the show notes below. So, Kathy, um, I'm always interested to know in stories like this how things got started. I know in my family, and there are many instances in my experience with fentanyl and with Donna's experience with fentanyl where we are very lucky to still be here today, and we come both from a long line of addiction. So, how did it get started for your son?
There's a lot of layers to that. I could
Mm,
go back and literally, you know, look at who he was and how he was showing up in the world when he was 2 and 3 and 4. And I think in some ways it started back then.
mm,
And most people always say, how did it start? It really means when did he start using drugs and what did that look like? And I
yeah.
think that addiction starts far earlier than that. The drug use is usually a way to feel better, to feel like they fit in. In Tristan's case, I think that was a large part of it. He was always super hypersensitive, loving, empathetic, caring, but he had a hard time making friends.
Mm,
And um, ultimately, he started using drugs as a way to feel at ease, lessen his anxiety,
mm-hmm,
become part of.
mm-hmm.
Um, so he started
So,
using. Mhm, go ahead.
so you just mentioned how he was showing up to the world when he was 2 and 3 and 4 years old. Like, what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, I've done a lot of research recently, and there's a lot of indicators that you can indicate when people are at risk of future substance use disorder, addictions of various kinds.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them can be seen in very young children, things like hypersensitivity, difficulty regulating their emotions,
Mm-hmm.
hard time making friends, and coming from a family with a history of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So individually, those things don't mean that your child's going to end up in addiction. But when you have all of those things together in one place, add to that some trauma, then they are at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And there's things that you can do right from that point onward that I think could minimize the risk. So Tristan was set up for, by the time Tristan hit his teenage years, he was well placed to fall into addiction.
Yeah. And what was it like for your family, like for your immediate family? He's living with you and whatever. What did that look like when the substance use started? Was it like really fast, or was it like a slow burn until things got bad?
It was pretty fast. The kid's dad and I were divorced, separated at the time. So Tristan and my girls, I have two older daughters,
Mm-hmm.
shared their time back and forth. Tristan was the youngest of three. My
Mm-hmm.
oldest daughter, just a bit of history here. My oldest daughter is now 6.5 years, like you, in recovery from
Mm-hmm.
her own substance use disorder issues,
Mm-hmm.
which Tristan brought her into recovery. And my second daughter never struggled with substance use disorder or addictions of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tristan. So by the time Tristan was 14, he had his oldest sister who was using drugs recreationally, who was a high school party girl.
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed fairly normal, I think, to him. And so he started smoking weed and using ecstasy when he was 14. He would drink a little bit, but he quickly learned that alcohol didn't really agree with him,
Mm-hmm.
and drugs did. So his 14th year, um, he was just using weed more than, certainly way more than I was comfortable with. I would like to say I wasn't comfortable with any drug use at all, but that wouldn't be true. I grew up smoking weed, and most people I knew did, and I
Mm-hmm.
knew my oldest daughter was, and I figured it was just a phase. So I thought he was too young for it, but
Was there ever any
I
push from
figured he'd
you?
come out of it. Well, sure, but there was not much I could do about it.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I never really understood is, when you're co-parenting in a way that is not necessarily aligned, but the kids go back and forth. If they don't like the rules at one house, they'll just go to another house.
Mm-hmm.
And so really I was just focused on go to school, do your work, come home at night, blah, blah, blah. By the time he was 15 though, and that's when he discovered cocaine, then all those bets were off.
Mm.
That's when he started really sliding. And as soon as he started using cocaine, the slide was really rapid.
Yeah. Yeah. And what did that do at home? Like, was he wasn't coming home? Did fights erupt? What did it look like?
He started coming home less and less often. He was kicked out of 3 different schools for drug-related charges. Again, it's not because the teachers didn't advocate for him or, enjoy having him, because when he was there, he was curious, he was engaged, he was a good student. Um, but when he wasn't, and he would, was found with cocaine in his locker. So that's an immediate out you get.
Mm-hmm.
So he ended up in an alternate school for at-risk youth, where there was nowhere else to kick him to. And so
Mm-hmm.
he didn't go to school because he didn't have to. They couldn't kick him out.
Mm-hmm.
He had been doing martial arts. He had been doing Taekwondo since he was 5, and he loved martial arts. That was his passion. That's what he wanted to be. And he stopped doing that as well. He was training at that point with his sister
Mm-hmm.
Tanis to get their second black belt. They got the first black belt when Tristan was 12.
Oh, wow.
And so he was in the training program to get a second black belt, and he couldn't even stick to that because the drugs just were getting in the way.
Yeah.
So lots of fights, but more than that, it was just he became very very scared and scary. Like he was a different person. He was in psychosis at times.
Mm-hmm.
He was really erratic in his behaviors and in his thinking.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, he stopped doing the things he used to love to do.
Yeah. So, what did that look like for you? Like at that time, knowing what you knew at the time, and you saw this behavior. What were some of the things that like you were doing to cope for you to be okay?
Well, the first thing, me being who I am, I'm a pretty hardcore problem solver. You put a problem in
Okay.
front of me, I will solve that.
I'm solving that.
And yeah, so once I admitted to myself that Tristan had a substantial problem, it was not just a phase that was going to go away. He had a
Mm-hmm.
relationship with drugs that was problematic and frightening. I set about trying to solve it. And the first thing I did was try to find a treatment center for him, um, try to get him into our doctor's office.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't go to the doctor's office because he said he didn't have a problem. I phoned all sorts of treatment centers and got the same story, which is they can't do anything unless he wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would say, well, he's 15 years old. He doesn't want to go. He wants to keep using drugs, but he's struggling.
Mm-hmm.
He has very poor mental health. How can he be the one making the decision for his health care?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't matter. There was no place for him. So what I ended up doing was trying to tap into, well, what does he love and what could he possibly love more than drugs? And my mind just kept coming back to the idea of martial arts. So I did a bunch of research and I found a kung fu school in China that takes foreign students.
Oh.
And basically kind of like the Kung Fu Kid story. And in fact, that's actually what I did. I set him down. We made popcorn one night and we watched the newer Kung Fu Kid, the one with Jaden Smith starring, who goes to China to study Kung Fu. And we watched it and he was all excited. And that was like a great evening, which was unpredictable at the time. Like, will I have Tristan to watch a movie with, or will he? But it all
Mhm.
worked out. We watched that movie and then I'm like, well, it could be possible. You could go. And he was like, he didn't believe it. He was like, whatever, it's like I got to finish school, mom. I said, you're not going to school. He didn't talk to me about it. He wouldn't talk to me about it for a couple of months, but then he came back. He said, are you serious about it? And I said, yeah, I'm serious about it.
Mhm.
So I ended up taking him to China a week after he turned 16, because at
Okay.
that point he hadn't been going to school for months anyway. And he was getting increasingly um, just not himself.
So
I had,
was he
mhm.
s- was he living at home still at this time?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So he was living with me, and honestly, back and forth between me and his dad's, and it kind of went through a cycle of he would be at my house until things got really, really bad, and we had a big blow up, and then he would go to his dad's house until things got really, really bad, and they had a big blow up, and then he'd be back at my house. So it was a little bit of a hot potato situation.
Mhm.
Again, because in his drug use, he he was erratic. There were times when he was abusive. There was times when he was very hard on himself, very hard to be around,
Mhm.
and uh, just took up all of the air almost. Like it was just hard to be anybody else when he was active in his addiction.
Mhm.
Um, and other times he was fine. It's just unpredictable.
So how did China go?
China was an amazing experience. So it took me about 2 days to realize that was the best possible place for him. Um, he was training hard for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, um, hardcore training, both
Mhm.
physical training as well as the mental meditation, tai chi, qigong, and he really melted into it. I was there for 5 weeks, doing my own tai chi and meditation training. And so I
Mhm.
got a chance to see where he was, to see who he was with, and to make sure it was a good place before I left him there.
Mhm.
And then he stayed there the first time for a full year. And it, he, that was the first time that I think he really found community. And that was his way of feeling like he fit in and finding his people, and his shifu, which is the term they use for master, or the kung fu master is his shifu, his teacher,
Mhm.
was like a second father to him.
Hmm.
So it gave him some successes. He was free from drugs for that full year, which gave his brain a chance to develop
Mhm.
and feel that he was successful.
So he was abstinent for a full year,
He was.
and after that year, he came home, or
He
what
came
happened?
home, and before he unpacked his bags, he went and got drugs and got loaded. And uh, then this cycle continued.
Hmm.
So the thing that did change um, after he came home that first time is he started cooking. He got a job at Mr. Mike's as a dishwasher to begin with, and then he started cooking, and he developed this crazy passion for cooking. He had so much energy that, and so much passion for the things that were in front of him. Kung fu, martial arts had been a passion, and now all of a sudden his energy was going into cooking, and he was cooking, um, at home and cooking at work. And kitchens are not necessarily a easy place for people who are wanting to avoid drugs or substance abuse.
Mhm.
Um, and he lasted at home for about 4 or 5 months until his addiction got bad enough for it to be a problem again. And he came to me one evening and said, I think I need to go back to China. And I said, well, nothing really changed. Like, it's great. That was a great experience, but nothing really changed. So why don't you consider a treatment center this time? And he was like, no, I'm not an addict. I don't need that. I just need to get reset. So back he went. He used an education savings plan that my aunt had set aside for him that time. I had paid for it the first time. Back he went to China. That was a little bit, he had some adventures there that his teacher had moved north. It was really cold. He ended up going to Thailand instead for a while. That wasn't so solid. He came home, and I was still problem solving at that point. So culinary school was the next big plan for him, which I was told by a counselor that I had spoken to that if Tristan was in addiction, he wouldn't finish school. So it was just going to be a waste of my money or a waste of his money. But he did it, and he did it really well. Again, that year was a crazy year of ups and downs because he was barely holding it together. But I think culinary school gave him that focus that did keep him holding it together. And we ate a lot of really good food that year. I'd wake up to cinnamon buns and everything fried in duck fat, and I don't know.
Best investment ever.
And again, it gave him something else that he loved doing. He was so keen on becoming a chef. He had, after he graduated, and he worked in some of the best restaurants in Vancouver. And after he graduated, though, I had enough at that point, because as much as I had been helping him find opportunities to find success, we did not have a healthy relationship at all. It was not good for either one of us. I was sick with worry all the time. And I was probably the biggest target for his abuse and his mood swings. So, but when he was 19, I found a room for him to rent. We found it together, and I moved him out, and I said, I'm done. Like, I've done all I can for you. Now it's up to you. And that I believed it at the time. Of course it wasn't. I continued to, he was not all alone. I continued to help him with rent and with groceries at different times. But it was enough for him to realize after a number of months that he could not hold his life together at all. His addiction was getting in the way of the things that really, really mattered to him, including his career, his jobs at restaurants he really, really cared about. And so it was 9 months after he moved out on his own that he told me, he said he needed help, and we were ready to get him into treatment.
So you mentioned before the show, you said codependency, and you said that you didn't like that term, and we can talk about that. But do you think that you were displaying those symptoms? Like, looking back now, would you say that you were offering him compassion and help, or would you call it to some extent enabling? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like helping with groceries, helping with rent, things like that.
It's complicated, and I don't like the terms because there's so much stigma attached to all of them, as if, what I can say is that while Tristan was a minor and I was responsible for him, for sure, I was going to do everything in my power to keep him off the streets, because Tristan was a beautiful, soft-hearted boy, and at 15, him being on the streets would have been something he never, ever could have recovered from. And I would have done anything in my power to keep him off the streets. And as he got older and became an adult, I had developed such a hyperfixation on him and his wellness that I don't know that was particularly unhealthy, but what was unhealthy was that it took all my space, so I didn't even consider my own health or wellness in any capacity. So that, to me, is where the problem lay, not so much in what I was doing for him, but in what I was not doing for myself. And as far as I talk about this in my book too, I took Tristan to buy drugs and I gave him money. Is that codependent? is it enabling? Well, I think it's probably the definition of enabling when you give your 15-year-old child money and drive him to a drug deal.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, given the circumstances in that moment and where he was, I still don't know that that was the wrong thing to do.
Well, and that's what
And
I was gonna hit on that. What do you suppose would have happened had you not given him the money?
he would have left the house, found it somehow, got the drugs, and he would have been disappeared for 2 days instead.
Mm-hmm.
And at that particular time, also, I was really trying to keep.
Mm-hmm. Please come back, Kathy. She'll be back. I have faith. Okay,
I'm back.
Hey, she's back. Okay.
I'm back.
Okay.
What was the last thing you heard?
We were talking. Hang on, I have to stop being deer in headlights for a minute.
We were on the topic of enabling or not and driving. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think, like, at that particular time, I was trying to do anything I could to keep him sane enough to get on the plane to China, because he was sliding so fast at that particular time that it's like I just needed to get him through the next little bit of time.
You needed him to stay
and
home.
I needed him to stay home, exactly. And then later, another instance I talk about of enabling him is he asked me for $1,000. He was living on his own at that point. And he told me he couldn't go home because there were people waiting to beat him up with baseball bats. And this was after I had told him that he was not getting anything more from me. And I took it to my, group at the time. I think I was a part of a craft or a group, an online group, and saying, this is what my son is doing. Like, what do I do? And most of them said, don't give him money because he's just going to spend it on drugs. And a few people said, give him money because it's not worth being beaten up. For me, it wasn't really a question. I did make him sweat about it, and I talked to my mom and she helped out, but we did end up giving him the money because we couldn't see him beaten up with baseball bats. And afterwards, of course, once Tristan got into recovery and we were chatting about it, he did tell me that he never paid the dealers. He was in debt. That was a true story, but he never paid them. He went and bought drugs and figured it out a different way. So is that enabling? I don't know. I think what I have learned and what I try to convey to any parents that I talk to is that if you are the parent of a youth who has a drug addiction and you're trying your very best to interact with them with, out of love and with good intentions, then you're a hero. Like, people do not understand how difficult it is and that it is an impossible situation to, like, it's you cannot, if the right thing means that your child is going to be well, there is no right thing you can do. In which case there's also no wrong thing you can do. I think the only thing you can do is act with love.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Tristan found his way to recovery just there. Were there more than one stints? Like, did he actually buy into it for a while? Like, how did that look?
He did. He bought into it kind of hook, line, and sinker. And yes, there were multiple attempts and multiple centers. And that was his third big passion, really. So it was like martial arts was number one, then it was cooking, and then his third big passion was recovery. When Tristan put himself into anything and bought into it, he went in, wholeheartedly. And I think it wasn't like he jumped into treatment and was suddenly all in it. It took a while, probably a couple months until he really felt like it connected. And I think part of that coincided with when he felt able to help others. That's when it really started sinking in for him, in a very meaningful way. So he was in treatment the first time for about 5.5 months. and then was kind of exhibiting some relapsing behaviors, what they called it. So he got transferred to a different center and ended up relapsing. So he was out that first time for about 6 weeks and in pretty rough shape before he came back. And it was his recovery community. He was part of the New Westminster NA recovery community, so abstinence-based recovery. Mm-hmm. And he ended up, he told me, at his wit's end. He had lost his job again. He had got a job, lost it, had a place to stay, was being kicked out, and he didn't know what to do. So he just wandered into an NA meeting on a Friday night, and he was completely loaded. But his friends were there. All of his recovery friends were, and they were happy to see him, kind of wrapped him in a whole bunch of support and said, "Hey, do you want to do this thing?" And he said, "Yeah, I do." So they wouldn't even let him go back to his place. They just gave him a place to stay, went, picked up his stuff, kind of shepherded him through the next few days until he could find solid ground. And they came up with a plan to get him sober again. And he was, from that point on, he was staying at his sponsor's house, actually, for quite a bit of time. And then when he got it shaky again, he was back into treatment. So the last 14 months of his life, he was sober for 12 of the last 14 months of his life.
So what were the circumstances around the poisoning now? Was this like a one-time thing, like he went back in the first time, or was he in the middle of a stint of use?
No, it was pretty early on. So, his recovery had been shaky, but he had kept going back. And at this particular time, he was kicked out of treatment again for using weed and drinking and not coming home. But had been no hard drugs at that point. And he convinced me, and I believe like 2 days later when I saw him there, he had still not used hard drugs. And because he didn't want to die. And this is the reality that people are up against right now. It is a Russian roulette to use street drugs at this point in time. Mm-hmm. But he had his team, he had his plan to go talk to his sponsor, figure it out, but he never made it to go talk to his sponsor. Instead, he went out and connected with some other friends that were not part of his abstinence-based recovery group, but he did connect with friends that were in recovery using weed, and that felt, I guess, comfortable to him. But he was also using harder drugs then, but he wasn't telling them.
Yeah.
So basically, by Sunday, I know he was still relatively sober. That's the last time I saw him. He got kicked out of his treatment center on Friday night. He stayed overnight with me the first night, and then I saw him Sunday, and Tuesday was when he passed.
How do you feel about treatment centers kicking clients out for reasons like that?
I have all of the feelings is really what it is. When he was first kicked out of his treatment center, I was livid because, like, how could they even kick him out when he hadn't been using drugs? How could they kick him out when he was showing behaviors for being an addict, for lack of a better word, when that's what he was there for? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, and they explained to me at the same time, he had come to a point where he was what they were calling unteachable. And it was true. At that particular time, he went and took a job that he wanted, that he was advised not to take. He was not taking his own inventory. So he was refusing to do the work. He was lying. He was not listening. And at some point, it's like, what can they do? They did not kick him out on the streets. Tristan has never been kicked out. Well, in the first place that he was kicked out, he was not on the streets. He was moved to another treatment center. So I think that was okay. And that treatment center who took him in was the one that he kept going back to multiple times over the next 6 months. And they always took him back. And so I give him credit for that. But how many, if he's not coming home at night, if he is smoking weed, and if he is drinking, that puts other people's recovery at risk. What I believe is that there should be something else, right? I talked to Tristan about this, and Tristan believes that, or he believed at the time, that abstinence-based recovery was the best for him because he was an all or nothing kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so he was on board with that. And yet I believe that there should have been some sort of safety net. Like, I do understand that people who are using drugs cannot be part of an abstinence-based community. I do believe in the importance of abstinence-based community for those for whom it works.
Yeah.
But there needs to be something else, because relapse is a thing. It's what people do. There is a cycle to recovery that not everybody, hits their stride coming out the starting gate.
Yeah.
And what is it that we can do? I don't know what the answer is. I just know that it wasn't there for him.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily blame the treatment centers for that.
Yeah.
I think that there's a larger question of system of care where there's just too many gaps.
I agree. And I'm sure we'll get into that more here as we go. I'm interested to know how long was it after you got the news that you realized that maybe you can use your story and Tristan's story to make things better for other people?
I think the first thing I thought of was that I needed to hold on to the idea of hope for myself as a way to prevent myself from drowning in the grief. When Tristan started his recovery journey, I also started what I consider to be my recovery journey. I was part of a parents group and connected then with a support group of other moms who have kids in various stages of addiction or recovery. And I began to learn how to live for myself, no matter what my kids were doing. I began to have hope, not just for my kids, but really I began to have hope for myself regardless. And realized that really the only person I'm truly responsible for at this stage of my life was myself. And I had never taken responsibility for myself before because I had always put my kids first. So I had began to learn to accept my children as they were and focus on myself. And when Tristan passed, there was a degree of hope that I had found in that I really wasn't willing to let go of. So I hung to it like a life raft. And that's how the book that I wrote began, was just a way for me to hold on to that hope. And I wanted to be able to share that hope with others. And then as I kind of, my grief softened a little bit, I thought more about Tristan's role in how he shared his stories for others. And that's, I think I had mentioned before, one of the things that was really important to Tristan's recovery is how he knew that his story helped others. He was not a natural public speaker. He was terrified and highly anxious to get up and start talking to people. And all the way through, I remember him always saying it's like his mouth would dry up and he would find it, really difficult to speak. But he would do it because of the feedback he got from even, just anybody who would say, you know what, your story is my story, and it makes all of the difference. And so this book became a way that I could share my hope with others. When Tristan was first struggling at 15, I had nobody to share my story with. Nobody understood. I was literally searching out support groups. I couldn't find any that were a good fit at all. It's really isolating to be parenting a youth in addiction and have nobody understand. They'd say things like, "Well, you should ground him." It's like, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Or, well, you should just try this. Like, people don't understand addiction. Your child's addiction is not a parenting problem, and it cannot be solved by changing your parenting tactics. It's really difficult. So I wanted to write this story so that people would not feel alone, so that
Mm-hmm.
people would know that whatever it is that they're experiencing, it's not unique to them. There's other
Yeah.
people who have done it and lived through it and continue to find a life of joy,
Yeah.
yeah, no matter what.
Yeah. So, uh, how long has your book been out now?
September, so 2 months
2 months. Oh,
coming up.
oh, that's still pretty
Yep,
new. Congratulations.
it is. It is, yeah.
Yeah. So, talk to me a little bit about some of the key points. Now, do you have people reaching out to you as a result of reading your book?
I have, and I'm always touched by whoever reaches out. I have had people that I have no idea who they are, and they've said that it has moved them, it has inspired them, they've felt supported.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the most the I really wrote this for people who are struggling, and
Mm-hmm.
those are the stories that really warm my heart. I was talking with one mom last week who was saying that it's a difficult read. It is a difficult read, but it kind of took her back to the early days when she was struggling in a similar way.
Mm-hmm.
But she was able to feel the hope, and that's what this was about. But some of the most surprising and heartwarming things that I've people that have knew Tristan have reached out to me,
Mm-hmm.
and that is what has really warmed my heart. I heard from people that have interacted with him at different treatment centers, or I heard more details from the woman who spent the last night of his life with him. Her, and her boyfriend. That's where Tristan ended up. And she just shared some really beautiful moments of Tristan's last night, of them laughing and him helping neighbors, bringing up the groceries, and introducing himself, and popcorn and Netflix, and just a really beautiful night of friendship. And
Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, I've had all sorts of people kind of reach out, and it's been really, really heartwarming.
Mm-hmm. So, this, what you just mentioned there, it does not sound like a circumstance that one would typically associate with someone being drug poisoned. Typically you would think of much darker circumstances. Was Tristan ever at a place where he was unhoused, where he was transient, or anything like that?
He was not. I think that was the reason why he first chose treatment, is because he knew at that point I was at a stage where I would not have taken him back at that point. His dad
Mm-hmm.
was not going to have him at home at that point, and he would no longer have a place to rent. So that was why he went into treatment the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Tristan was never unhoused. He was never unsupported, in that he either had a job or um, EI, or he always had access to a job. He
Mm-hmm.
never, towards the end of his addiction, he was not able to hold a job, but he
Mm-hmm.
could always get a job. He could get
Mm-hmm.
a job, work a few weeks, get a paycheck, jump out, be out for a couple weeks, get back in. So no, he never had that experience. He was not, he was a clean cut,
Mm-hmm.
uh, nice looking guy.
So let's talk now about, because I know I saw somewhere, and I can't remember exactly where. I think it was in the bio you sent me, that you work with Stronger Together Canada. Um,
I was
Correct?
Healing Hearts Canada.
Healing Hearts.
Healing
Sorry.
Hearts.
Yes.
Yeah, I had.
They are a wonderful support for our platform as well. We've been working with them for a long time. Um, when you work with people in those groups? Now, I know you already mentioned a few of the little talking points of how you can start to be okay, whether your loved ones are okay or not. But maybe you can unpack that a little bit further for us. Like, say, for yourself, for example, you are having a bad day. Some old things are coming up. Something happened that you are triggered. Can you give us some tools and some things that you do to get through those?
Yeah, and it's different for every person.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the one thing I want to be super clear about, particularly if you're dealing with the grief of a child, the grief of the loss of a child, and especially to drug harms. There's a lot of complex trauma around, it's not just a simple grief, it's a complex traumatic grief is what they call it. So I don't want to sound really trite by saying, oh, here's some things that you can do and it's going to help, because the reality is nothing's going to make it go away. And that's, I think, maybe the first thing to understand is your grief is there because of your love for your child, and there's nothing that's going to get rid of your grief.
Mm-hmm.
What you can do that is helpful is you can learn to accept your grief. You can learn to be grateful for the things in your life that still, bring you meaning. You can
Mm-hmm.
learn to focus on the things that are still beautiful in your life, even if it's just a tiny, tiny little thing, even if it's just one moment, even if it's just your breath.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then learning to let go. Those get you through those really hard moments. Sometimes it is literally as just focusing on taking the next breath
Mm-hmm.
and breathing. Like I can't, it's hard. Like there are
Yeah.
times when it is just hard, early grief, and you can expect it to be hard. And you don't know, it's going to come up in very surprising ways. And it still does. Like to this day, I'm going into my 7th year. It's been over 6 years. And now it's a little bit more predictable, but I feel my my mind and my body shifting towards holiday times and towards, Tristan's birthday and the anniversary of his death. And I have no control over it. My brain might seem perfectly fine, like I'm ready to keep going, but there's something in my body that just, no, I'm going to go into grief mode for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And my brain doesn't think as clearly, my body doesn't move as quickly. And I have to give grace to that. I just let that be. I can learn to accept that. But also, there's ways that you can learn to deal with your grief by, again, acknowledging it, by acknowledging your negative feelings, and then also leaning into the things that bring hope,
Mm-hmm.
leaning into the things that continue to, bring joy to your life. For me, it was my early days, it was my granddaughter, because it's really hard. um, it's hard to hold grief and joy in the same. Well, you
Space.
can hold grief and, well, yeah, it's hard to hold sadness and joy. I can hold grief with anything. I've learned that actually grief makes a really good backdrop to joy, but it's hard to hold
Really?
sadness. And it's like a contrast. Like living in grief for so long, you start to experience joy, and it's like, whoa, that joy is brighter and more precious than any joy I've ever experienced before.
Hmm.
So,
You know,
but it's hard to hold sadness and joy at the same time.
I can relate to that. You know, and
Mhm.
that's why we um on our platform put so much value in lived experience, because like I know the darkness, you know, and Donna,
Mhm.
she knows the darkness, and there are times where we lay together and we're like, I can't believe this is our life now, and
Mhm.
I don't think that that experience, what we're experiencing now, would hold the same value in our life had we not gone through what we went through. So what you're saying there, it really it that makes sense to me.
It is so true. It changes your perspective and your priorities tremendously. I have so much more gratitude for the simple things. I have so much more appreciation for the people I still have in my life, for the
Mm-hmm.
things that are important. And I have very little patience for the things that are not important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, I'm interested to know, and typically when we have people with lived experience of overcoming addiction, I say, like, when did the light first really turn on for you? You know, like when did your recovery really start to get traction? Was there a pinnacle moment that do you remember having like a single thought that finally made something click, or you saw something, or can you unpack that for us a little?
There was a couple moments, but for me, I think it was really, as I said, when Tristan went into recovery, I began attending his treatment center's parents group.
Mm.
And I did that so that I could be a better parent for Tristan in his recovery, because so I could understand what Tristan's recovery looked like, where he was staying, how to be a good recovery mom. That is how I showed up in that group.
Mm-hmm.
And over, a series, it wasn't one moment, but over a series of weeks and probably a month or two in, I realized that I was not really think thinking about Tristan so much as every time I thought about Tristan, it would come back to me. So it became clear that the parents group was not really about how to be good moms for our kids. It was just about how can we be good to ourselves? How
Mm.
can we live the lives that we want to live?
Mm.
And there was certainly a few moments there where it's like, okay, I get it. My life is actually mine to live.
Mm. So
And
so you didn't see the value in your own life, in your own happiness, in your own safety.
no, and I think it was, I'd like to, people like to blame that on his codependency or because of my children who lived in addiction. But I think that I was codependent, if you want to use that word, or certainly not very self respectful, I suppose, in a way. Throughout my whole life, I had always been in relationships where I put other people before me.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an excuse. I think it's easier for some of us to care for others than it is to care for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was a wake up call saying, you know what, I am 50 something years old at this point, and I have never once put myself first. And it's my life. Like, it's my life.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the wake up call for me.
Mm. We've got a comment here from Canuck in MT. You don't see
Sorry.
that?
Oh,
No, I didn't see that on the queue. But anyways, excuse me. She says, I lost a young man that I loved like a son to fentanyl poisoning a year ago. I feel like I'm not allowed to grieve for him because of the circumstances of his death.
Have you heard anything like that before, Kathy?
yeah. First of all, I want to say I'm so sorry. There are so way too many of us. And this is common. This is why it is so important to find people who understand, who have shared experiences. I have been fortunate in that I am surrounded by people who do not judge me for the circumstances of my son's death. And yet I
Mm.
still don't feel understood by them. I feel understood by other parents who have lost children to drug harms in a way that we can talk about all of that stuff. So, the importance of being able to share our stories openly with people in a way that makes us feel safe and understood is so very, very important. It's one of the reasons why I became a Healing Hearts facilitator. And I'm not anymore. I was for a period of time and I stepped away from that a few months back. But being able to connect with other people with shared experiences is life changing, because there is still so much stigma and so much judgment and so much shame that we carry um, around the idea of drug use and drug addiction, that it's really hard to talk to people. You can. I even experience this if people I don't know well. I'm not. Um, I'm not that shy about expressing my history, so I'll let people know, I lost my kid to drug poisoning, and sometimes you just get this look on their face, and it's like deer in the headlights, and then they'll change the subject and move on, and it's hard. People, not everybody can hold space for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I understand what she says. It's like you can't grieve, but you can. You've got to find the people to grieve with, and whether that is um, finding people to share your stories, or what really my main therapy in grief was writing my story. you need to find a way to get your story out of you. And even if it's on paper, even if it's in painting, one of the people in the groups that I was would macrame her grief away. It doesn't matter what it is, but you need to find a way to get it out of your body and into the world in a way that you can kind of see it objectively or release the pain of it.
Have you ever come into contact with people who just didn't get it, like maybe judged you or said hurtful things?
I think I've been extremely fortunate. And maybe it's because I'm like, as an extreme introvert, I don't know a whole ton of people. The people I do know, I'm very selective about.
Yeah.
Having said that, I've certainly, kind of in the earlier days, I think things have changed. Maybe not. Sometimes if I've written things and they've appeared in newspapers or magazines, there are comments, right? You know what the trolls are saying. It's like,
yes. God bless the trolls.
I don't. So there's that. And I have responded to some of them at different times and learned mostly not to. Every once in a while, I'll give it a go. But there are people for whom you will never change their mind or opinion. What I was hoping to do in sharing my story, because my story is not in any way telling anybody how to do anything, it's just sharing my story. That's it. I was hoping that people might understand things differently, might understand that people who struggle with substance use disorder are people, and they're worthy people, and they're good people, and they're valuable people. I hope that that's true. I also know that there are some people that just are never going to hear that, no matter what.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier you had some particularly impactful quotes from your book that you may want to share with us.
I have one I could read around. One of the things that was super interesting to me in writing this book was how my perspective of things changed as I was writing the story. And because writing the story is a way that I processed not just my grief, but of Tristan's death, but it was the grief of him living in addiction. It was my piece of the puzzle, how I understood everything and how I understood things changed. For example, I think it's fairly universal for mothers of kids who struggle in this way to feel guilt and to be very hard on themselves. And one of the ways that helped me is as I was writing the story and I was looking at the narrator on the page, which is also me, but a narrator on the page, I was able to feel so much more compassion for her than I was for myself. And that allowed me to bring more compassion to myself. And the same was kind of true with Tristan. One of the things that I learned after his death was how big of a role trauma played in his life. And I had no idea when he was alive really how substantial trauma was for him, both in terms because he was really hypersensitive, so he was easily traumatized in ways that maybe some other people were not, but also in that there was some serious traumatic events that I had never known about. And not just things that occurred to him, but things that he had done in his addiction that perpetuated the trauma and passed it along to others. All right. He was not at his best. He operated outside of the value system that he held when he was in addiction. And that continued to cause pain for people.
As so many
and
do.
so as they do, and I struggled with this. I really struggled with the idea of, do I share Tristan's stories that I never knew when I was alive, but I know now? Do I share them? And I decided to, for exactly that reason, is because so many people do. Like, really, this is how people in addiction, long-term addiction, this is how they behave. Not well.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they're not good people. It just means that they are they are acting out of addiction. And I think what I had mentioned to you earlier was that so many of us moms like to separate our children from addiction,
Yes.
and like that's the addictive behavior. That's not my son. And then when my son comes back, okay, this is who he is. He's not that. And what I'll just see if I really what I came to understand was that he was his addiction, because he had those those thoughts in addiction, the behaviors and the feelings, and he didn't have the privilege to separate that from himself. He had to live that, and he had to live the consequences of that. And then he had to apply the strength and the healing that it would take to recover from that and
Mm.
to make things better. And by me denying him his addiction, that was denying his wholeness. That was not appreciating the effort that, of how he was moving from one place to another. Um, I think I just kind of summed it up. So I don't even think I need to read. I said it more eloquently in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But that idea that, Tristan was, I think of Tristan, if you think of addiction as a kidnapper, like Tristan was held hostage by it. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that there were not times when Tristan was there, like enthusiastically along for the ride. Let's go. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
And there were some times like he was just being dragged along, and there were other times that he was like literally fighting for his life to escape.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter which way, he was there.
Mm-hmm.
So he couldn't separate himself from his experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
So,
was those experiences that ultimately were bringing him strength and compassion to help other people.
so tell me, I a question came to my mind when you learned of these things, when you learned of how he perhaps propagated trauma in other people through his actions. Um, did that change your grief?
Oh yeah. Well, yes, I mean, I learned very, very early on in my grief, because I read his journals, and that is something that, um, again, I don't know that I'm not proud of. Am I apologizing for it? No, not that either. I think it's one of the things that we do struggle with as parents of kids in addiction who have been in treatment centers. They tend to keep journals. We get them. What do we do with them? And there's all sorts of moral debates. Should we look in them? Should we not? And
Mm.
for me, it really wasn't a question. I just really felt I needed to know my boy. Like I needed to understand what this was. So I read them, and I learned about some things that I did share with one of his sisters early on. But other than that, I didn't share with anybody for 5 years, and I certainly had no intentions of writing
Mm-hmm.
any of these things down. I just held them, and it was a piece of my story that I did not share. And at some point in, that was still like a really heavy weight. I could talk about finding hope and finding joy. I could talk about addiction. I could talk about all of these things, but I could not talk about the trauma that Tristan um, had continued to spread.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, not that long ago, it just came to me is that I was doing the same thing that that people do in addiction, that we do when we are not well, and that is keeping secrets because we are ashamed. And I realized that Tristan was not doing anything that so many others do in similar circumstances, and that I was doing the same thing that so many moms do, is pretending, or like, we're holding our pain for our children but not letting it go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to share the full story so that other parents could feel, again, so other parents could feel like they aren't alone. Like, Tristan was not
Yeah.
unique. I am not unique. This is part of what the experience of living with someone, loving somebody with addiction is. And his shames are not my shames. He was getting to the point where he was working through them. He was doing the work. And that I can be proud of. I'm so proud of him. Like I don't think I've ever been more proud of anybody than I was of seeing how hard Tristan was working at in his recovery. So the fact that he had something to recover from should not be shameful.
Yeah. You mentioned he brought his sister into recovery.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So his sister, my oldest daughter, Jen, had her own unhealthy relationship with alcohol and drugs, and wasn't sliding at the same supersonic speed as Tristan, but it was always a cornerstone in her world.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to one point where it was putting her relationship with her daughter at risk, and she was not able to get a handle on it in a way that felt safe for her. And because Tristan was in recovery at that time, Tristan would drag her out to meetings, and she was still going to an NA meeting and then going home and pouring herself half a bottle of wine. But she was paying attention, and she realized how much healthier Tristan was and how much happier Tristan was. And Tristan would take him along to hang out with his sober friends, and go for meals and have fun and laugh. And she began to see the possibilities, but she didn't feel she could do it on her own. So she ended up choosing to go into treatment as well. And they shared the same recovery community for the last couple months of Tristan's life. And they were there to support each other. And as Jen says, Tristan was there to believe in her before she could believe in herself. And he was the one who she felt the love from when she couldn't love herself. And it was because I loved her. Like, she had so much love around her, but she could feel it from the person who understood what she was going through in her own addictions. That's what really saved her, she says.
Well,
so yeah.
Did we hit it all?
I think we did.
Awesome.
I think we did.
Okay. Is there any message that you would like to leave us with tonight?
No, I think the only thing I want to say is, if there are any parents out there who are struggling, just know that you are not alone. There are so many of us who are struggling with loved ones in addiction, or having lost loved ones in this drug crisis. And share your story, find your people. They are there. Don't expect people who don't understand to understand, but there are a lot of us out here who do. What's
your book called? Where can we find it?
Book is called Here With You, A Memoir of Love, Family, and Addiction. Looks like that. And in Canada, you can find it anywhere you buy books. And in the States and elsewhere, you can pre-order it for a spring release. It will be released in March 2024 in the US and around the world. It's available anywhere in Canada.
Can people follow you on social media? Where can they find you?
They can find me at K Wagner Writes. K is just initial K, Wagner Writes, .com, or on Instagram or on Facebook.
Awesome. Okay, thanks so much for joining us tonight, sharing your story with us, spreading a little hope, and that's it. We will let you go.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Take care.
Have a great night. Okay, bye.
Okay, stick around. If you're watching this live, stick around till after the closer. We're going to spin the wheel and give away 2 copies of Kathy's book. Other than that, thanks so much for watching. If you have not yet given this a like, please give us a like at the bottom of the screen. If you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe. Hit that notification bell. We go live every Friday morning, every Sunday evening. We've got lots of content for you to go back on. If you don't have time to watch, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. That's it for tonight. Take care, everyone. Stick around for the wheel.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.